But there are, so urban design and also the legal design, I mean, one of the things that I've asked in my blog recently on the Children Nature Network, I would like to see an international conference on children, nature, and the law to look at how the law itself puts up barriers. In the book, I talk about the criminalization of natural play. We're sending very clear messages to our kids. We don't necessarily hear them, but they do. So the legal design, the urban design, the overstructuring of childhood in developing countries, we think we need to enrich every second of our children's lives by getting them Suzuki violin lessons and putting them in the back seat of the minivan and racing to the soccer meeting with a flip-down television screen in which our kids are watching from the back seat a National Geographic special about nature instead of looking out the window. You know, that kind of overstructuring, it's all well-meaning because we think we need to enrich our children's lives in upper and middle class neighborhoods in the United States and also elsewhere. And we've forgotten that nature itself is one of the most enriching experiences, that the full use of the senses, which other than a New York subway, I can't think of any place other than the natural world where you use all your senses at the same time. The biggest reason, at least in the United States, I don't know how true this is in Australia or in your countries, the rest of you, but you get CNN, many of you too, is fear. We are scared to death of stranger danger. We are just terrified to let our kids out the front door. A study was done in the UK showing the concentric circles going back to grandfather's time all the way to now and showing the radius that kids can go from their homes, and it's now down almost to the front stoop, whereas their grandfather could ride a bike and go to a municipal pond and go fishing. You know, I think it was 4 or 6 miles away, something like that. We are just scared. When you look at the actual statistics in the United States, for instance, you'll see that violent crimes toward children, particularly from strangers, have been going down for 20 to 30 years. Then why do we feel this accelerating sense of fear? And it is palpable in the United States. All you have to do is watch CNN or Fox Network or some of our cable 24-hour news channels, and you'll see how they take a handful of terrible crimes against children, and then they repeat those stories over and over and over again until we believe that there is a boogeyman in every woods, a boogeyman in every park, you know, a rapist at every street corner. Our kids are going to get snatched instantaneously if we even turn our eyes away. That's no accident. We're being conditioned to live in a state of fear by my profession. And I think my profession needs to own up to some of that. Some people think this is some kind of conspiracy. I don't, because that would attribute too much institutional intelligence to my profession. But it has the effect of conspiracy. And it's changing the way we live, and it's changing our children's lives. I want to be clear here. I'm not saying there's no risk out the front door. Of course there's risk from bad people. They're out there. There's risk from nature itself. I know because as a boy I collected poisonous snakes. I even have a copperhead, that's a poisonous snake in the Midwest, in my garage somewhere in a jar where the formaldehyde has dried up in the last 50 years, I think. And it's out there somewhere. Every now and then it surfaces. A high school friend of mine visited recently, and junior high and high school, and I told him about that, and I said, I don't remember that snake, that poisonous copperhead that's in the bottle out in the garage. He says, oh, I do, Rich. I remember you at the bottom of the hill, you were racing up the hill, your knees were bloody, your elbows were bloody, and you were waving that damn snake in the air, and you were so happy. So there is risk outdoors. That's part of the attraction of the risk of nature. But we need to begin to think in terms of comparative risk. The UK is doing better on this, and at least discussing it, than the United States so far. But the kinds of legal restrictions that are on people are tremendous. There is risk outdoors, but there's a huge risk in raising future generations under protective house arrest. There is a risk to their body because of child obesity. There's a risk to their psychological health. There's a risk to their sense of community and of democracy. Believe it or not, to develop a sense of community, you have to go out into it. You have to know people. You have to know land. There is a risk to the future of conservation and environmentalism. The studies show that almost to a person, conservationists, environmentalists, whatever we want to call them, had some transcendent experiences in nature when they were kids. What happens for large sections of the population of the developing world if that fades to the extent that it is no longer considered normal or expected for kids just to go out and build a fort in the woods? Environmental education in the classroom can only do so much. We have to get kids outdoors. The good news here is not only the fact that the research is coming forth that is really explaining how wonderful and necessary, I believe, that nature experience is for healthy child development, but that there is a kind of movement growing. Just in the last 3 or 4 years, it existed before Last Child. Last Child is not the reason for it, but it's been proved to be a useful tool. Just within the last few years, in the last 3 years, there are over 71 regional, state, provincial campaigns to get kids outdoors in North America. These range from regional campaigns in cities, for instance, the Cincinnati Leave No Child Inside initiative, to whole states. There are probably about 15 governors that are signed on so far to this idea. The Canada, Bob Peart is here today. They have started a national campaign called the Children in Nature Alliance. This is spreading very quickly. And one of the interesting things about it, and this certainly has to do with parks and your future, is that this issue brings people together across political and religious barriers, more than any issue I've ever seen. It doesn't seem to matter what somebody's politics or religion is. They almost always want to tell me about the treehouse they had when they were kids, that special place in nature. I gave congressional testimony a couple years ago, and it was a subcommittee, Interior Subcommittee, and I think there were 6 congressmen who showed up. I was told that's a big turnout. And there were 3 of us giving testimony about future trends. One was from the Nature Conservancy, talked about land. One was from BioServe, I believe, that tracks endangered species. And then there was me. And I was third, and they had PowerPoint presentations, so I figured I was a goner in terms of amount of time. But they extended the hearing. Afterwards, it was very interesting. The congressmen, they asked a few perfunctory questions about land and species, and then all they could talk about was their special place in nature when they were kids, and you couldn't shut them up. In those moments, there were no Democrats in the room, and there were no Republicans. There were just 6 men with a shared memory, and they didn't, like that rancher in Albuquerque, they didn't want to be in the last generation to have that experience. It really bothers people deeply at a primal level when they begin to think that the privilege they had, the wonder, the sense of wonder they had when they were kids, when they heard that wind in the trees, might not be available for kids